we do like to get some opposition insight onto the show, and we've got a big game coming up this weekend. In fact, I would argue this is Celtic's most difficult league game between now and the end of the split, as Celtic go to Easter Road, which is statistically perhaps the hardest ground that Celtic visit in the SPFL over the recent years. So this is a big game for Celtic, and I'm delighted to have Liam Bryce along to discuss the game. And rather than me speak for Liam, I'll let Liam speak for himself. Liam, welcome to the show, and perhaps you can let the listeners know a little bit about yourself and where they can find you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks very much for having us, first of all. As I said before we came on, it's always nice to do something a wee bit different. I work for the Hibs Observer, so we're a sort of subscription-based site for Hibs fans. We're a kind of offshoot of the sort of Herald newspaper. We do a kind of I originally worked for them, and then we've kind of taken down the road of sort of club-specific websites where people can get sort of dedicated coverage of their clubs, and so I was drafted in to do Hibs, and that has been me since September 2023, and it's been it's been interesting, very up and down, mostly down. I think over the past year or so, things starting to take a wee turn now, but it's been good. So yeah, that's what we do. We sort of we try and kind of give as in-depth coverage as possible of the club, whether that's tactical analysis, retrospective interviews or interviews with current players, managers. We do a lot of work on YouTube as well. Sort of as in-depth match day coverage and pre-match coverage as we can. So we like to think that we're kind of giving the best offering in terms of Hibs coverage these days. I'm sure some people might disagree, but that's what we're striving for, and it's been a lot of fun so far.
Nice one. And so where can people find you? Give us some like X handles or anything like that.
They can find the official account is at Hibs Observer, and then I'm pretty sure it's underscore Hibs Observer. Let me just double check that while I'm here. Yeah, at Hibs Observer underscore, and my own personal Twitter is at Liam Bryce underscore. So there's a bit of consistency there. So you can get us on there if you're interested in checking out anything that we do.
Yeah, so as I say, the listeners and viewers here are always interested in the opposition. It takes two teams to make a game of football, and you're generally impacted by what the other team tries to do. So that's what we like to kind of get into here. So in terms of Hibs this season, I mean, it's been almost a bit of a remarkable season that's shaping up to be. And when I was thinking about this, I was almost characterising it as you and Aberdeen are going in different directions. Aberdeen had this incredible start and have then gone into this absolute nosedive, and then Hibs, what was it, 2 wins in the first 15 league games? And then now, what is it, 10 league games without defeat and 2 cup games, or 12 games without defeat?
Yeah, 12 games.
That's an amazing run.
Yeah, and I think the only game that the Hibs lost in the last maybe 13-14 was that game at Celtic Park. So it's been a real kind of run of consistency, where there really was none at the start of the season. And you mentioned Hibs and Aberdeen going in opposite directions. Well, it kind of... it's been kind of talked about a lot how that's been sort of catalysed by that game. It was a Wednesday night at Easter Road, finished 3-3. Hibs were 2-1 down going into stoppage time, equalised in stoppage time to make it 2-2, then went 3-2 down and then equalised again in I think the 98th minute to make it 3-all. So it seems that moment is just saying, both team season have done a 180. Hibs on an upward trajectory since then, and Aberdeen obviously fallen. I know they got back to winning ways, but it's been probably an even worse run for them than it was for Hibs at the start of the season. So I think from where they were, Hibs, I think there was at that run of games there was fans that were genuinely not with any sort of, I think they were justified in talking about kind of fear of relegation. That's how. In terms of the results, there was always wee bits and pieces in the performances that you maybe felt right that there could be something there, but the results were so bad. 1 in 13 at the start of the season, that a lot of folk were starting to think, God, is this going to be a case of just trying to stay up? But now, obviously, the focus is on trying to get into the European places, which in itself is a sort of remarkable turnaround to even be, to be talking about that from where Hibs were. And it's obviously great credit to David Gray, great credit to the players. And I think they've kind of set themselves up for this run into the split where it's it's kind of got to be all about you've done all this work getting yourselves into a position. Now I think for Hibs it's all about going and turning that into something tangible, whether it is qualifying for Europe or I know obviously the listeners of this pod won't fancy this too much, but if it's going deep into the Scottish Cup at Celtic's expense, being the team, that David Gray said itself, somebody's going to have to beat Celtic at some point if you want to win silverware in this country. He's kind of the view, why can't it be us? Mm-hmm. That's been a name since the start of the season. So it's very much all to play for from a position of real kind of misery. I think if you're talking about kind of September, October, even at November time, it was difficult. But they deserve a lot of credit for pulling themselves out of that hole and getting to where they are just now.
Got you. So I mean, on this show, we tend to focus on performance, not outcome, is the sort of mantra. So when I look at Hibs and I look at their underlying performance numbers, one of the many metrics that I look at is an expected points model that basically models, it's like a Monte Carlo simulation, takes the underlying data from a game, games it out over sort of 10,000 iterations, then to give you like a percentage. How would this game have turned out by percentage if you'd replayed it 1,000 times or whatever it is? So I'm making that sound more complicated than it needs to be, but essentially, based on the underlying data, where should you be in the league? And Hibs are very, very definitely and strongly actually third would be third on that basis in terms of had the games played out as perhaps they should have done. We know that football's not like that. It's a low-scoring sport. Things happen. So to me, that suggests that unlike Aberdeen, whose numbers always were overperforming what their underlying performance data suggested that they would be, Hibs are not. So it looks to me like Hibs' performances are more sustainable. So I know you mentioned, obviously, as football fans, we all remember moments, we all love moments, and that game against Aberdeen was full of moments crammed into those last sort of 30 seconds or last couple of minutes or what have you. But, going on long runs, 15 games, 13 games, whatever, it's unbeaten, that's not based on moments, that's based on, must be based on some sort of sustainable performance attributes. So what do you attribute this improvement to? Was it always the case that they were playing well and just maybe those moments weren't going their way? Or has David Gray gradually tweaked or adjusted things in such a way that they're now playing in a more robust manner?
I think there's a bit of everything, really. I think the most kind of striking thing about the current run, we had a kind of good kind of deep look into this the other day as to what the sort of numbers looked like across this unbeaten run of 10 league games, and the sort of expected goals difference between for and against has been going really steadily in the correct direction. That's been going a nice sort of upward curve. I think if you sort of dig down into that a bit deeper and you look at where so we looked at it over the sort of 10-game rolling average of expected goals for and against, and the real difference is the expected goals against has really, really dropped. I think at the start of this unbeaten run, I think per 90 minutes Hibs were on, I think it was about 1.34 expected goals against per 90 minutes, and now that average is sitting at 0.66. So they've really, really improved defensively. The goals against there was a few weeks where they really kind of hit their stride attacking wise, and that got up over 2 at one point. It sort of levelled off again. And I think when you look at we kind of look at the sort of overall attacking and defensive performance. Before this run and then after it, and the real striking difference was, the defensive metrics. It's kind of right up there. I mean, the set piece XG conceded right down, the overall XG conceded right down, XG per shot conceded right down. They're conceding fewer shots, fewer counter-attacking shots. And whereas, there's a dramatic difference there wasn't really the same shift from pre-unbeaten run to post in terms of the attacking output. Because they are scoring more goals, but I think in terms of if you're interested in the underlying data, there wasn't really too many significant shifts. They were always at a high set piece expected goals. They've been really good from set pieces this season. I think the most striking thing before and after is the XG per shot. that went up. So they've just been kind of probably more efficient in front of goal when chances are coming their way. So it kind of says to us that the real sort of catalyst for this is just being so much more defensively solid. And there's maybe two things behind that. As I think for the Aberdeen game, the infamous Aberdeen game now, David Gray, he did switch from a sort of 4-2-3-1 to it's a sort of 3-4-1-2, if you like, and they've looked so much more comfortable with that back three, especially. He brought sort of Rocky Bashiri into the team. Almost, he was sort of forced to. Rocky hadn't played a lot for a lot of the season, but the summer signing, Marvin Ekpiteta, he got a sort of long-term injury, kind of forced Gray to rethink what he was doing. Brought Rocky into the side, and either side of him, it's usually been Warren O'Hora and then Jack Iredale, who's a natural sort of left-sided centre-back on the other side, so that's made a big difference as well. And they've just been a lot more solid in that shape. They can drop it into a back five. They've got the two Cadden brothers on either flank. Generally, Lewis Miller's played on the right occasionally. But I think, the form of Rocky Bashiri, he's made a huge difference. He kind of plays in the middle of that back three, and it just kind of lets him do what he's good at, which is just being a defender. Not too much responsibility placed on him as there was last season to be, the guy who's starting attacks when that's not really his game. He's just been allowed to focus on defending, and he's been excelling at it. So, the change of shape, that's made a big difference. And then, there's you kind of talk about Hibs and the expected points, and they're sort of being up there as kind of the third team. I think they probably would be in reality if it wasn't for they just had these. We talked about moments before. They had so many of these moments where things just capitulated unexpectedly and suddenly. In that initial run of games, there was guys just making bad decisions. That I think I can recall 3 red cards that turned games in the opposition's favour. They were 2-1 up at Tannadice going into stoppage time and managed to lose 3-2. What was the game? Dens Park, 1-0 up, playing really well, red card, ended up losing 4-1. Just late goals conceded. So it's been kind of stuff that wasn't reflective of the overall performance, but then they started facing questions about mentality. Is this team a bit soft? Can they not, can I dig in when they need to? That kind of more intangible stuff, So yeah, it's been a case of cutting that out. The change of shape has obviously benefited the team as a whole, and I think it really has been a case of just tightening up defensively, because they've always had attack. Even last season, Hibs generally always do have some good attacking players, good attacking outlets. And if you've got a sort of more solid base to build on to let them go and do their thing, then it's probably anything's a better recipe for success, I suppose, than conceding goal after goal in stoppage time.
Absolutely. So you touched on the defence there and the reasons for that. One thing you didn't mention but I wanted to ask you about was the goalkeeper, because it seemed like the Jordan Smith being introduced into the team coincided with that start of that really good run of results, and wanted to get your views on him as a goalkeeper and really what his contribution has been to that good run and that tightening of the defence, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I need to apologise to Jordan for not mentioning him in amongst all that, because he has been so important.
Right.
They brought in Joseph Bursic on loan from Club Brugge during the summer. Had a good pedigree down in England under 23 cap, I'm sure, or under 21s. Went out to Belgium. It was kind of hindered by injury out there. Came in. David Gray was quite categorical when he came in. Joseph's coming in as my number one, but it just didn't work for him. It was mistake after mistake. He just looked generally shaky. You could tell that was rubbing off on players around him as well, I think, and it got to the point where, again, I keep coming back to this Aberdeen game, but the game before was up at Dundee. I said they went 1-0 up, got a man sent off and lost 4-1. I think Bursic threw a couple in that night as well. And it got to that Aberdeen game and Gray he didn't have any choice but to change it. There was no way that he could keep going. But Smith was, such an unknown quantity, because he'd come in from Nottingham Forest, but he hadn't played a league game for about 3 years. he'd been
Right.
just a sort of career number 2, really.
Because he's 30, isn't he? He's not a young. He's not a
Yeah,
young kid, is he? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I suppose if you're looking at, it's kind of what Scott Bain has become at Celtic. Just kind of guy he's there, he's around the group. He'll, occasional appearance maybe, but Smith, he hadn't really. It was almost as if he'd kind of settled into that. This is my role. I'm kind of happy to carry that out. First game, understandably, he'd not played in a league game for a few years, looked a bit rusty, but he's really grown into it, and he's just been steady. Really, really steady in kind of all aspects. Whether it's playing out, he's coming for crosses, handling the ball, shot stopping. It's just there's no longer a kind of erratic figure in the Hibs goal, which is again just when players don't trust the goalie. That's a problem. It's a big problem because guys are nervous. They don't really, I think if so much to be said for defenders knowing that if they've got a reliable goalkeeper there to bail them out if need be, or or you can give them the ball, you can rely on him to come and deal with crosses. It's made such a difference, and he's just been kind of going from strength to strength. Really, he made a brilliant double save against St Mirren at the weekend there, and that was a kind of a case of he's saving Hibs points now. It's not just a case of coming in and steadying the ship a wee bit. He is making a tangible difference with some of these saves he was making. He's made a brilliant save against Ayr United in the Scottish Cup to stop that going to extra time. So it's been whether he ends up being the age that he's at. I don't know if he's going to be the long term solution. He's got a contract till 2026. But he's just been really steady all round. He feels like he can do a wee bit of everything. He's makes you wonder why he hasn't maybe gone and tried to play somewhere before now. He's spoken to the press a few times. He's really, really good, really, really open, and he's basically said, this has been the best period of my career, and it's only been since November really that he's come in and played. So it's obviously a big deal to him as well. He's loving playing his football. Hibs fans have really taken to him, and he has ended up making a real difference.
Yeah, I think I'm firmly of the view that I think goalkeepers is such a specialist position, and obviously teams don't like to change their goalkeeper. So, and you can only have one on the pitch. So, I think it's the one area in the field where there's probably a lot of inefficiency, and there are absolute gems out there. People who are undervalued because they just simply don't play, and teams will generally have 2 or 3, if not 4 goalkeepers on their books, and only one of them is generally the first choice. So you're not telling me that the other 3 aren't hopeless. There's probably some real gems out there. So that's fantastic. So just before we move on to the sort of other end of the pitch, then just wanted to finish up on the sort of not so much even defending, but more off the ball, without the ball play. So a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, really. One is I've seen a few Hibs games. One of them that was noticeable to me was the home game against the Rangers, when those defensive errors, calamities that you called it, they looked like they were going to collapse early in the game. They went 2-0 down. It looked like it was going to be a horrendous match for them. And then Gray made a tactical change where he stopped chasing the game. He stopped pressing the opposition, and you let them have the ball more, which is exactly the way you have to play against that team. You let them have the ball, and then you feed off of that rather than open yourself to the counter, which is what Hibs had done. So I was impressed that you'd made that tweak, and it worked out for them. So I wanted to ask you firstly about Gray's tactical approach, his flexibility. Is he a manager that wants to play one way and he always play that one way, or is he somebody that tweaks and adjusts depending on the opposition? And then secondly, the other aspect of play that really stood out for me about Hibs off the ball is the extent to which they press high up the pitch, and how effective they do that relative to the rest of the league. In fact, they're not far off Celtic in their effectiveness in terms of winning the ball high up the pitch and what have you. Is that something that Gray's introduced, or was that something that Hibs have been developing over the years? So Gray's flexibility and then sort of pressing strategies, I guess, are my two subjects.
Well, one of the first things he said, David Gray, when he got the job, and he was asked about how he intended to play, because there was a lot of kind of discontent with the style of play under Nick Montgomery. I'll not get into that, but there was a kind of real interest in, how much is Gray going to change this? There was a kind of feeling that, the Hibs were going back to, sort of Scottish football experience, somebody with like a kind of a wealth of, years under his belt in this league, although he was, a first-time manager. And one of the first things he said is that I want to be adaptable, because he basically believed that that is kind of what you have to be in this league. There's no kind of no point in sticking to sort of one way of playing it, and we're going to stick to that no matter what happens. So, kind of through pre-season, you sort of saw that he didn't change to the three at the back until November, but he actually played it in his very first game back in the Premier Sports Cup against, I think it was Elgin. It seems like a lifetime ago now. But so there was always kind of anticipated that he was going to change it up at points. So he's been flexible with formations, although he does now appear to have settled on the three. But in terms of kind of tactical approach, yeah, I think they've been willing to mix it up. I think most home games, this probably won't apply to Saturday, but most home games, Hibs do have most of the ball. They will try and play out from the back. They will try and build from the goalkeeper. They will try and build through midfield and into the forward areas. But then there's also maybe away from home, he's been a wee bit more pragmatic. Certainly against St Mirren on Sunday there, terrible pitch, not horrible conditions. It's not the biggest pitch either. St Mirren just a generally horrible team to play against. There was no playing out from the back whatsoever. That ball was going long. I think I heard the ball screaming for mercy at one point between the two teams. It was not a great game to watch.
Yeah.
There's been a couple like that. Maybe that was the most extreme example, but I think the pitch really did play a big part in it, because it just wasn't conducive to getting the ball down. But he's, he has been happy to go a wee bit more direct. Wouldn't say, that it's generally been kind of, sort of hoofing it, but just like maybe getting the ball forward a wee bit earlier in away games. And I think, again, that's paid off at certain points. There's maybe some times where I don't think it's. I think certainly, on Sunday there, they had a kind of front two of Dwight Gale and Martin Boyle, who, not big burly target men by any stretch of the imagination. So it kind of, you're going long towards two guys like that. If you can't get them in behind, or you can't get the ball into Gale's feet for him to, to play off and bring others into the game, then you're not going to get much success. So it's kind of mixed results with that, I think. But he has been very adaptable, and I think off the ball as well, you've seen it. I think the game against Rangers was the prime example of tweaking approach in game. He sort of went a bit too gung ho, were his words about that game. But I think sometimes there is that. At Rangers, I don't think. I think there was the impression, and there's obviously certainly still is, that you could get at them, and I think there's sometimes maybe with the Edinburgh clubs there's a kind of expectation among fans, to get after, the likes of Celtic and Rangers, not to just sit in and try and hold on. I think you maybe saw that in the Rangers, the Hearts Rangers game at the weekend. Their Hearts were, they should have won that game, but there's a kind of well accepted sort of wisdom now that the way to play against Rangers is to let them have the ball, as you said. Hibs were a wee bit all over the place in that game. Gray managed to change it. He just sort of tucked the kind of held the wing backs off a wee bit, and sort of, there was about 3 or 4 examples in the first 20 minutes where guys were just jumping at the wrong time, pressing when it wasn't on to press, and the Rangers were just popping it around them and getting out. He kind of held the wing backs back. Josh Campbell, he's been sort of playing as a number 10, brought him into sort of more of a flat central 3 and just took it from there. And they didn't do anything spectacular, to be honest, but they just worked their way back into the game. And that's kind of what he can be all about sometimes. It's, he's sort of trusted that, if we can stem the tide a wee bit, we can gradually and pragmatically just work our way back into this game. So he's quite a calm head tactically. I think he's learned on the job, certainly. I think some of his substitutions earlier in the season took a bit of stick, but then he didn't have great options either. So I think that kind of played into it. But he certainly seems to be maturing and picking things up as he goes, which I think was always going to be the case. He's never he's I know he's everybody knows he's had like 4 stints as caretaker, and this was kind of now or never. But he's been very adamant that now that he felt ready for it, and I think there was always going to be a period of settling in. I think tactically, and him getting across what he wants to do, because I think there's always a lot of talk about letting if it was a young player coming into a team, about letting them settle, giving them time to adapt and get used to it. But I don't know if that is particularly afforded in the same way to young managers, where it's it's just not viewed in the same way. Where he's kind of where he's maybe allowed to make mistakes. I know it's it's different if you're a young boy who's coming off the bench for 15 minutes every so often, whereas you're the guy who is leading the football club. But it's the sort of same principle applies. He had to kind of get a bit of time to learn, and he has done. And you can sort of see that he's settled on a shape and a system that works for the players that he's got. In terms of the pressing, it was something that wasn't great early in the season, those earlier games, but they really seem to have sort of fine-tuned it. I think again the change in formation has helped, because I think one of the things is it's brought Martin Boyle off the right hand side into, certainly when Hibs are defending, into a front two, and he's a very kind of effective player to have in terms of pressing. Martin Boyle, he'll run and he'll run and he'll run. It's generally been Dwight Gale alongside him, who obviously he's kind of 34 now. He's talking about retiring at the end of the season. He's been kind of quite open and honest about how his body's not really doing what it wants it to do anymore.
I hear him.
But he's clever. He knows where to position himself. So and then you've got the two out wide. You've got Nicky and Chris Cadden. Chris Cadden, especially, he's maybe not got the sort of attacking threat of his brother, but he's a very reliable presence. He'll run all day for you. He's got to be. I think he's. I don't know if anybody who's ever played wing back is. By far, it's the graveyard shift. It's the worst position on the pitch. But he was in the press conference last week talking about how much he loves it. So that's a guy who can certainly, fancies himself to be able to run about a bit. So I think in terms of elsewhere, I think using Josh Campbell as the number 10, again, not a lot of other options, but I think before that it was sort of Junior Hoylett who was playing in there, who's not as obviously, again, another kind of veteran. I think Hoylett's 33, and I think Campbell's main strength is what he does off the ball. He's very diligent defensively. He'll press all day. He gets into tackles. He kind of knows where to be, and I think maybe they sacrifice a wee bit of attacking, maybe a bit of creativity by putting Campbell in there, because that's not really his game. But certainly since that change, bringing Boyle in to press centrally, Gale's got he's got the nous, he's got the experience. You get Campbell in there as well. The two Cadden brothers, there's athleticism there. There's and they seem to have really worked on it, because I said it wasn't really working a lot at times earlier in the season. It felt a wee bit slapdash, but now it feels kind of one of the as I said, we've talked so much about the defensive improvement being key to this run, and I was maybe putting a lot of that credit onto the back three before, but certainly how they've improved in that regard has made a difference as well, I would say.
Yeah. So, I mean, you touched on Boyle there, so I'll put my hand up and say, I think last season I commented after we'd played Hibs that, I felt that Boyle looked to me like a player that was on the downward decline, age based. He's a player that always relied on pace, one of the most dangerous attacking players in the league for sure for years, but obviously relied on his pace, was getting older, and just didn't look to me like he was. It just looked to me like he was in decline. But this season, I'll hold my hand up. His numbers have got better and better as the season's gone on. Nicky Cadden, you mentioned there, his attacking output numbers are fantastic. So, what do you attribute, especially Boyle's? I might be unfair calling it a renaissance. You might have use a different word, but he certainly seems to have improved certainly on last season. Is that down to being used in a different role, or is he got over injury issues, or what would you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think again it's a combination of everything you've mentioned there. He did have some injury issues at the start of the season. He had to get an operation on his wrist. He was playing with a cast on for several weeks, and then I think it came to an international break. They said, right, go and get that sorted. He might have, apologies, I can't remember, he might have missed a game or two either side of that break. But I think there was a good bit of man management by David Gray. He wasn't playing well in the 4-2-3-1. He was playing on the right hand side of that, really kind of ineffective, just a sort of peripheral figure throughout kind of a lot of games. I think Gray dropped him for, I think it was 5 games in a row. Came off the bench a couple of times, and I think he was trying to get something out of him. And I think, again, the change of shape has benefited him because he's his starting position is in the front two, but he's got a lot of license, I think, to kind of roam around and do what he sees. Kind of play off the cuff a wee bit. He will make runs through the centre, but he'll still maybe pull out to the right hand side. I remember there was a game where we kind of had a real focus on him afterwards, and not only did he do that, he was kind of dropping into the number 10 position at times. He'd come out on the left, so it was clear that he'd been given a bit of license to go and kind of play the game as he saw fit, and I think it has that has helped him because he's no. When he was playing in that 4-2-3-1 this season, Hibs is, the kind of general build-up wasn't great a lot of the time in it, and then it would just be sometimes a case of, the ball get out to Martin Boyle, slowly getting shifted out to the right-hand side. By the time it gets to Boyle, opposition can easily double up on him, and he's not, he's still probably faster than most people in the league, but he's not got that, that absolute lightning turn where he could just, kind of breeze by somebody from a standing start, and he was kind of struggling that way. So I think this change of position, it's helped him. It's helped Hibs get sort of more out of him in terms of what he can still do now, rather than what he's traditionally been good at. Because he's sort of he's playing, if he's playing through the middle, he's still got that pace where we've seen it a couple of times. If there's maybe a quick turnover in the middle of the park, he's still got the, if he's got the run on a defender, he can still go off the shoulder and he can play through. Scored a goal against Aberdeen exactly like that. Ball was intercepted in the middle of the park. Aberdeen are out of shape. It was one pass. Boyle was away from the centre half, so he went through and scored. I think as well the one of the benefits of playing him centrally is Hibs have been able to get him on the ball sort of in the box at times. In that kind of, that kind of wee sort of inside channel almost between the sort of centre forward position and out onto the right, and it's a kind of different proposition, I think, for defenders sometimes when you're squaring up to a guy in the box rather than if you've got him pushed out wide towards the touchline, guys are scared to touch him in case they knock him down. He had a brilliant assist for Nicky Cadden in that same game at Pataudry by picking the ball up in that area. And it's just given, I think, his game had become a wee bit predictable, I think, Boyle. And this has given him it's kind of reintroduced that unpredictability to it, where defenders maybe don't know where he's going to pop up, what he's going to try and do. He can try and affect the game with the opposition in front of him, or he has still that threat playing on the shoulder if there's a turnover. So it feels like it's been sort of been tailored to him. And it's been like, right, how can we get the best out of him again? And I think as well, the man management and dropping him for those games is maybe a little wee bit under a fire under him, because he's not. I know when he first came to Hibs, Martin Boyle, he wasn't a regular in the team for quite a while, but I think once he did get in, he's always been, he's been one of if not the main man. Because there was a game, Hibs beat Ross County 3-1 just before, I think it was November, December, and Boyle came on for 10 minutes, and the full time the rest of the team went and did a sort of kind of lap around the pitch applauding the fans, but Boyle was straight down the tunnel. He wasn't. You could tell he wasn't happy. Right. Like, you could tell there was. And then the next game was when Gray brought him back in up at Pataudry, scored 2 goals, I think 1 or 2 assists, and then it's been kind of, so he's as if he's like he's sort of challenged to get that out of him, and it's worked so far. He had an absolute stinker on Sunday against St Mirren, right enough, but so did pretty much everybody. Right. But it's been a good turnaround for him. It is, and it's. I think Hibs need him. They still need him. I think that it's getting to the point where folk were like, would you even bother offering him a new contract next season, because he had become that sort of, it looked as though Hibs' career was maybe winding down. but he's sort of shown that he can still be really, really important.
Okay, so we've painted a picture here of an improving defence, of an attack revitalised with around the veteran Boyle, but he's certainly been boiling this season. A couple of provocative stats I'll just throw at you
Okay.
before I ask you the next question. So Hibs have got one of the lowest ball in play time, so this is how long the ball actually is in play during the game. With Hibs games, it's one of the lowest in the league, and the average 47% possession. So that suggests to me they're a team that are quite happy not to have the ball. And you've talked about their pressing off the ball, the defensive resilience a little bit as well, and we've talked about the flexibility and adaptability that Gray has brought to managing the team. So how are Hibs going to set up against Celtic? How do you think Hibs can hurt Celtic based on how they've developed their strengths this season?
Yeah, I think in terms of setup off the ball, I would expect it. I think not too many changes in terms of personnel. Like I think, sorry, excuse me. I think you see the likes of Josh Campbell continue the number 10 role up front. I don't know, maybe Dwight Gale. I'm not 100% sure, but Boyle will play. I think it will still be, this is all fitness permitting, of course. Wide, I think it will still be the Cadden brothers. Midfield is not kind of cut and dry at the moment. Nectar Triantis, he'll start if fit. He's probably been, I think I've not touched on him yet, but he's probably been Hibs' best player, I think, since the form's turned around. But in terms of who plays next to him, that's a wee bit up in the air at the moment.
Because it won't be Kwon, I guess.
No, it won't be Kwon.
You won't be allowed to play.
Yeah, Kwon ineligible. Joe Newell still coming back from injury. Dylan Levitt missed the game against St Mirren, although I do believe he has trained this week, but whether or not he's a wee bit unreliable with fitness updates sometimes, David Gray, so you don't know if what he's telling you is actually what's going to come out on a Saturday. So I mean, they could have to bring in Nathan Mariah Welsh, who's not really played a lot this season, and he's a kind of sort of midfield terrier type, which maybe suits this kind of game, because I think Hibs are going to have to, they're going to have to suffer, and I think you'll probably see a setup that maybe something akin to what they changed to in that game against Rangers. I wouldn't be surprised to see Campbell become just kind of dropping in, becoming sort of part of the flat midfield three at times. The wing backs being quite conservative off the ball, and I think in terms of how they can hurt Celtic, I think they need to try and, to an extent, I know they end up getting beat 3-0 at Celtic Park the last time, but I think the joy that the Hibs got that day was from being brave at times, and trusting themselves to take the ball and be able to keep it for extended periods of time. Because they did that a few times in that game, and they kept the ball, they moved it around enough that there was a couple of times where, memory, I think they maybe managed to drag Liam Scales out of position. It created space in behind, and then they just popped it over. Obviously, Celtic play that high line. I think they need to try and do something akin to that again. Whether it's going to work or not, whether it'll be enough, I don't know. But I think that's the way they need to go. They need to try and back themselves to be able to play, rather than just I think there was that first league game at Easter Road, there was almost a kind of sitting in and waiting to get beat feel about it. They were still, the team was kind of, in terms of how it was taking shape, was still very much in its infancy. There was a lot of guys who played that day, who weren't even at the club yet, I should say. They really struggled in the middle of the park against Celtic that day. They couldn't sort of deal with the positioning of the two number 8s. So I think that day it was O'Reilly and Hatate couldn't deal with that at all. They had the amount of times I remember that day where it was kind of one pass from, I think, Cameron Carter-Vickers as a Celtic centre back straight through, taking out the entire Hibs midfield. So I think they've come a long way since then, but whether they'll have enough to really trouble Celtic, I don't know, because they do. That St Mirren game at the weekend there, it did give the impression that a few guys are maybe running on fumes a wee bit, in need of a wee bit of a rest. There was a sort of jaded look about the performance, and there was a kind of an element of that in the United Cup game as well. There's a lot of guys who have played a lot of football they have got guys who are coming back into contention now, so within the next couple of weeks they should be able to freshen things up. But at the moment, they are they're looking a bit tired, I would think, and I don't know if that'll maybe influence Gray's game plan. In terms of defensively, just trying to soak it up, not going chasing, not expending, too much energy. Maybe the old classic wait and try and stay in it until the hour mark, or with 20 minutes to go, and then they might bring on Kieran Bowie, who's a marquee summer signing. He's had 2 serious hamstring injuries in the space of a year. The second one a couple of weeks after he came to Hibs, so they've been really careful with him. I don't expect any, great surprises in terms of the setup. I think it'll be fairly conservative. I think they will try and stop the sort of ease with which Celtic played through their midfield in that game at Easter Road.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that they'll be brave on the ball. I would like to see them try, even if they go and get beat again. I think fans, especially at Easter Road, there will be a sort of certain level of expectation to try and take the game to Celtic to some extent. But I think it'll be interesting. I don't know if Hibs have got enough to get it done, especially just in the kind of as I've kind of said, the sort of physical state of the team that I feel has maybe been dropping off a wee bit. They might go and prove me wrong. But I wouldn't expect any great surprises in terms of the setup. I think it might follow the pattern of they probably try and do similar to what they did at Celtic Park.
I mean, that in some ways that was a spectacular performance. I know the game finished 3-0 to Celtic, but I think Schmeichel made something like 7 saves from memory. It might even have been 8, but it was probably more saves than I've ever recorded for any Celtic keeper in an SPFL game. Like since I started records, it was like incredible. And not all of them were great chances, but some of them, I think the Kucherev, the striker, got 2 or 3 really good chances 1-on-1, which. So the Hibs were fantastic that day, I thought, in terms of the way they played. I would be optimistic if I were you, because we're coming off the back of Munich, obviously. The teams played 2 games a week for like ever now, or the last 3 months or something ridiculous. We made 2 substitutions on Tuesday night. Kuhn went off with what looked like a muscle injury. I don't know if he's going to be fit. I think I don't think Rodgers will want to rotate, because, as I say, he'll know that this is arguably the hardest game Celtic have got between now and the split, and I think they'll want to keep the momentum going in the league. I think he'll want to pick the strongest team he can, but I think there'll have to be some pragmatism around some of the selections just because of fatigue. So I don't know what Celtic team is going to come, and I think based on how they have played recently, I think they'll try and almost conserve energy by keeping the ball. Will be how they'll play. So they'll try and contain the game. They'll try and control the game. Whether we'll have enough dynamism in the final third, given the fatigue in the team, I don't know. So I think it could be a very interesting game, and I think there'll be something in it for Hibs. I think for sure. So listen, thanks for all that. I just wanted to touch on one more subject before I let you go, Liam. So obviously, multi-club ownership and investing in football clubs has become a hot topic over this week in the Scottish football. Now, you listen, separating fantasy world from reality, we know that in reality, whatever is going to happen at Ibrox, and it could be anything from a full takeover by a billionaire-laden San Francisco 49ers, or it could be a play to have Leeds have a feeder club. It could be or anything in between, or nothing. We don't know. But the topic's an interesting one, and what we've seen in Scottish football for sure, in terms of what's actually happened, is we've seen 2 very different models in Edinburgh. We've seen Hearts, where Tony Bloom, who's the owner of Brighton, and he also has a stake in Royal Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium, and his data-driven analytics kind of empire really focus on football operations, focus on recruitment, etc., to sort of game really and Moneyball, if you like, finding the best options at price point for those clubs, and being very successful at it. And I'd expect to see, if Hearts hierarchy and their board fully embrace Tony Bloom and Jamestown Analytics, I would be very surprised if Hearts didn't improve quite quickly over the next couple of years. And then at Hibs, we've seen a tie-up with Bournemouth, I think. So I just wanted to. So I know it's a different model. It's probably more along the lines of not big Prem, but a Premier League club looking to get round some Brexit regulations on access to young players, but also using it as a bit of maybe a gateway to sending a few players on loan. Although I don't know if they have done that yet. But you tell me what's your understanding of what the Bournemouth hookup and relationship is? What's the nature of it? How does it manifest? How's it working? What's gone well? What's not gone so well?
Yeah, well, I think we're sort of. It's almost been a year, I think, since it was signed off and confirmed, and I think honestly, we're still not actually quite sure what the relationship is. It's not really been defined. It's not really either by somebody coming out and saying, right, this is what the setup is, or just by how things have developed. The patterns of maybe, as you say, there players coming on loan, or it's not been entirely clear. And I think you might remember during the summer after Hibs hired David Gray as the head coach, and after they appointed Malky Mackay as sporting director, that the owner of Bournemouth and then the owner of the group, the Black Knight FC as they're called, Bill Foley, basically came out and said that Hibs they've not been listening to us. They've not been taking on our input, and I think the understanding there basically was that Foley and his group did not want David Gray as head coach, nor did they want Malky Mackay as sporting director. So there was always been a kind of sense that there was a big deal made of this, in terms of it being promoted as game changing. I think that was the actual phrase that the now former Hibs CEO Ben Kensel used when it was when it came in. But since then, it's almost as if there's been times where Hibs have been sort of keen to stress that they are still calling their own shots. They're not being ruled from down in Bournemouth, and I think that was certainly the case by hiring Gray and Mackay, where the club wanted to go down more of a sort of Scottish football experience type route. So it's since then it's not been clear. The Black Knight FC, they made an initial $6 million investment. A lot of that's gone into infrastructure, at the training ground and at the stadium. Some of the money's gone into the women's team. Some of it's obviously gone into the men's first team as well, and the academy too. So there's been investment from that side of things, and I think that'll be a kind of long-term thing. But as I said, it was kind of up until a point. It was there was a kind of. It's always been kind of stressed that there's no issues with the relationship. Everything's fine, but people were kind of a wee bit. How is this actually working? What are the dynamics here? And especially that obviously changed when Foley came out and said they're not listening to us. And the Hibs were already bottom of the league at this point, I think. Or they just lost to Celtic Hearts in the League Cup, and Foley said, "Well, I think they'll start listening to us now." Since then, there's maybe been a bit more evidence that they are having more of an influence. The sort of one of the top guys in the group, his name's Tim Bezbachenko. He's been at Easter Road a few times. He's been he's been up to the training ground. They also brought in Garvin Stewart as head of recruitment, and he was head of Bournemouth's recruitment analysis for a few years. He's now moved full time up to Hibs. That's been quite clear. This is a full time move. He's leaving Bournemouth to join Hibs. It's not just Hibs are getting a wee loan of him from Bournemouth. I think again that's maybe comes back to Hibs wanting to keep their not distance. I don't think that's the right phrase, but have their own sort of saying things rather than I think they are quite careful for it not to be perceived as they are basically being run by Bournemouth. So it'll be interesting to see now if, having had someone up from that group, that there'll be kind of more of a tie-in with recruitment, because as I think you rightly said, when we started talking about this, there's not anybody came up on loan yet from Bournemouth. There was one, a young lad named Owen Bevan, but he was supposed to come up twice, and he got injured twice, and it was it fell through. And again, Hibs have been quite clear that we're not going to just take players from Bournemouth for the sake of it. It's got to be guys who can come in and implement the first team. Basically reading between the lines of that is like, we don't want to just develop Bournemouth's youth players. So it's kind of overall, it's been strange, I think, is the way I'd maybe describe it. It's not really panned out, I think, the way a lot of Hibs fans would have expected it to. They thought it was going to be a game changer. It's been a wee bit more of a slow burn than that. I think now, especially with the head of recruitment coming up from Bournemouth, we're maybe going to see more of a sort of, if you like, a kind of more aligned approach. I think the fact that things weren't going well at all at the start of the season probably gave Bournemouth and Bill Foley a wee bit of leverage to say, look, you should really start, letting us in to influence this a bit more. It's still, I can't really give you a sort of definitive answer as to whether it's been, a good thing or a bad thing so far, because I think there's still sort of more questions than answers around it.
So thanks for that. That's really, really interesting and not surprising. I think in football, where you've got an excess of ego and a clash of cultures as well, probably, and then you've got different levels of expectation and understanding and all that. I mean, the history of multi-club ownership is littered with failures, really, because of those reasons. I'm not declaring Bournemouth and Hibernian's relationship as a failure. I think, as you've said, it's too early to say. There's clearly some growing pains there, and I think people getting overly giddy about the prospects of multi-club ownership and hookups with English clubs probably should listen to you carefully, in terms of it's a salutary lesson on how these things can be quite slow at sometimes to get going. I mean, it may well turn out to be a mutually beneficial arrangement, but at the moment, as you say, it sounds like everyone's still finding their feet, really.
Yeah. What I would say is the other clubs in the group are doing quite well now. Obviously, Bournemouth, they're a huge success story. Lorient in France, you could maybe, they are doing well at the moment, but you could caveat that by saying that they get relegated from the top flight last season under the Black Knights' watch, but they seem to have kind of got their act together. In the second tier, they're on route to get back up. The other club is at Auckland FC in New Zealand, a sort of newer club who, by all accounts, have started off pretty well. So they've got a good track record, the Black Knights. But it's just, as you say, it's hard to predict from. No two clubs in a stable will be the same, so it's hard to say how each is going to take to it.
I mean, obviously, these are very different clubs operating in very different environments and very different cultures. But to me, and I don't want to be unfair to Hibernian, but they all sound like clubs who are relatively smaller in their environments and therefore have some growth potential. And what I mean by that, in sort of capitalist speak, is some obvious investment potential in terms of, it probably wouldn't take a lot to improve those clubs quickly. Which if you're looking at it as an investment play, and let's be quite clear here, people like the Black Knights are not in this because they had pictures of Pat Stanton on their wall when they were kids. They're in this to make money, and the easiest way to make money is to find undervalued assets and sweat them and get more out of them. So, and Hibs, I would definitely say Hibs are prime for that. This is a relatively big club in Scotland that's probably underperforming, probably undervalued, and if you could get regularly into the Europa League, for example, you could turn that into quite a profitable enterprise. But,
absolutely.
So listen, lots more to come on that particular story. But listen, Liam, is there anything that you wanted to raise before we go? I've taken a lot of your time, but I've really enjoyed the conversation and the insight that you provided.
No, I think I've waffled on enough, to be honest with you. I think people have probably had their fill of me, to be honest. But no, enjoyed it. Thanks very much for having us. Really enjoyed it.
No, thank you. And can just remind people again where they can find you, where they can find the Hibs Observer on social media.
Yeah, we're on hibsobserver.co.uk is the website. And I am at Liam Bryce _ on Twitter, and then the Hibs Observer official account is at Hibs Observer _ so you can you can see what we do on there. I don't know if there'd be any Celtic fans who'd fancy subscribing to read about Hibs, but the option is there if anybody wants to shell out a quid. But that's where we're at on social media. That's where you can find us.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Liam. Good luck with the Hibs Observer, and thank you ever so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.